Morning, everyone. This is a bit of news in headlines until we get to the updated news. I just want to refresh your memory a little bit. Last week, or about a week and a half ago, the Financial Post reported UN Racism Committee calls for halt to Trans Mountain coastal gas pipelines and Site C dam over treatment of First Nations. And then Reuters last week, or January 17th, so a couple of days ago now, today's the 19th, reports UN chair says he didn't know most First Nations support building the coastal gas pipeline, right? And so you can check that out. Links are in the description. And this article was posted on the same day, January 17th, and it is National Post reporting. First Nations chief blasts condescending UN anti-racism directive that called for pipeline to be shut down. So, and it's not just First Nations chiefs who are blasting the UN council for this. It is Jason Kenney and a whole bunch of other people, but we'll look at this one for now. Okay, here we go. A Canadian First Nation chief is slamming a recent directive from United Nations Anti-Racism Committee after the organization called for the shutdown of an Indigenous-backed pipeline, only to later admit it did not seek Aboriginal views toward the project. In December, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD, released a directive calling for 3 large-scale natural resource projects in British Columbia to, quote, be immediately shut down, including the Coastal GasLink natural gas pipeline that would feed into a massive export facility along the west coast. The project has signed benefit agreements with 20 Indigenous communities along its 670-kilometer route. But in an interview with Reuters published Thursday, CERD chair Noureen Amir, Noureddin, excuse me if I got that wrong, Amir, admitted that the committee did not study First Nation views toward the project, saying he did not know that most communities supported it. Quote, I did not know that most First Nations agreed to that, he told Reuters. This is something new that comes to my understanding. He further said that he did not seek out further information on the project because the role of the committee does not involve investigative work. And no, the role of the committee is to virtue signal away on the world stage using your taxpayer dollars. Why? Because our leaders want coveted seats on the United Nations Security Council, or whatever, rotating seats, temporary seats, for which they will bribe and sign non-binding agreements to which then judges are bound. It's very, very odd. Well, it's not odd. I know exactly what's happening, but, look into it. It's really interesting what's happening because this is the economy that makes our world go round, right? Like, it's frustrating. Back to the article. Haisa Nation Chief Crystal Smith, whose community has signed a community benefit agreement with Coastal, told the National Post, quote, I frankly find it condescending to the work the 20 nations have done in the past 6 or 7 years to get the project to where it is today. She said the UN directive points to the bombastic quality of discussion around major resource projects in Canada, which have received intense scrutiny over the past decade, largely due to a perception of widespread First Nations opposition. Quote, I think it speaks volumes in terms of the sensationalism around a topic that is getting so much attention, Smith said. There are sides to the story that are not being reflected, and frankly, there are not many voices in the media that's in support of the project. I scroll down a little bit. Amir's admission of ignorance also sparked a heated response from the Alberta government and various First Nation representatives. Quote, I nearly spat out my coffee. Chris Sankey, former elected band councillor with the Lax Kw'alaams First Nation in Prince Rupert, said Friday, excuse me if I've got the name wrong, the community was in years of negotiation over the proposed Pacific Northwest LNG project, which has since been scrapped. Of all people, someone in his position, you would think the very first thing he would do is at least gather information on both sides of the story. It's unfortunate he never did his homework. Quote, he could have looked it up online and found it in seconds, he said. Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage also blasted the admission by the UN after criticizing the initial directive. Quote, it is unbelievable that a United Nations committee who attempted to single out Canada didn't even realize that many major Canadian projects have earned for First Nations and community support, she said in a written statement. Haisla Chief Smith said the agreement her community signed with Calgary-based TC Energy, who is building the pipeline, is its best chance of attaining autonomy and becoming financially independent. Proceeds will go towards broad poverty reduction programs and other social tools, as well as efforts to revitalize the local culture, she said. They offer the solution to social issues that no other entity, no other political body, no other government has been able to offer to do for our people. And interesting, right? The UN says one thing, and quite bombastically, and then admits they didn't even really look into it. And really, Shutting down these projects would damage indigenous communities, a whole bunch of them. Good job, the UN. This is the problem with disconnected central governance, right? Do you think if Canada was fully ruled by the UN and we would have any ability to correct this? No, they don't care. They don't care. They want to virtue signal. This fits the narrative, push it through. It's wild. It's wild. Moving on, CBC is reporting 2 GTA men indicted in U.S. for allegedly trafficking items for Pakistan nuclear program. 2 Mississauga, Ontario men have been indicted for allegedly helping to run an international procurement network over a 5-year period to traffic materials such as aircraft parts and satellite communication equipment to support Pakistan's nuclear program. Father and son Muhammad Ashan Wali, 48, and Haj Wali Muhammad Sheikh, excuse me if I've got any of that wrong, 82, are among 5 men accused of being associated with an alleged front company called Business World based in Rawalpindi, a city in northern Pakistan, according to the United States Department of Justice. I scroll down a little bit. The defendants smuggled U.S. origin goods to entities that have been designated for years as threats to U.S. national security for their ties to Pakistan's weapon programs, said U.S. Assistant Attorney General for National Security John C. Demers in a news release Wednesday. This indictment puts the world on notice not to do business with these defendants and demonstrates our commitment to holding them accountable. It also stands as an example of the kind of deceptive behavior U.S. businesses need to watch out for in designing appropriate export control and sanction compliance programs. In its news release, the Department of Justice said the accused worked from September 2014 to October 2019 to acquire materials from the U.S. for the Advanced Engineering Research Organization, AERO, which supplies weapons to Pakistan's armed forces, as well as to the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, PAEC. Those materials included airplane and engine parts, power sensors, semiconductors, and satellite communication equipment, among other items. The U.S. lists both AERO and PACE as contrary to its national security or foreign policy interests. AERO was added to the list in 2014 after the U.S. government said it found the group the group used front companies to obtain materials for Pakistan's cruise missiles and drone program. The indictment claims the accused tried to conceal the actual intended destination of the material obtained from the U.S., which were allegedly paid for by the Pakistani entities. The Mississauga men allegedly received over $140,000 in wire transfers from a Pakistani bank account controlled by AERO and held in the name of a Rawalpindi branch of the supposed front company, Business World. Those funds were then allegedly used to pay U.S. companies to export the goods from a Business World account in Canada. The men also allegedly failed to apply for an export license from the U.S. Department of Commerce to export the goods to Pakistan. Federal export control laws are vital tools that help prevent items from being exported overseas where they could be used in ways that can jeopardize our national security, U.S. Attorney for the District of New Hampshire Scott W. Murray said in the release. The indictment says the accused have been connected to 38 separate exports from the U.S. involving 29 different companies around the world, including 3 in New Hampshire. Each of the 5 men has been charged with 2 counts of conspiracy, the news release says. None have been arrested. I was going to say no arrests have been made. So indicted just means charged with a serious crime. And the U.S. is looking for them. So I don't know if there's a warrant for their arrest out or anything to that effect, but it's interesting to note, right? Trafficking arms through Canada, trafficking goods through Canada to hide your destination to Pakistan. I mean, the world's moving fast, right? What's happening? Here is National Post. This is reported on January 17th, and it says UK expands Hezbollah asset freeze targets entire organization. Now, up until now, the Iranian Guard Quds Force has been the designated terrorist organization, and a lot of governments have pushed. The United States has declared basically all of the arms of the Iranian machine terrorist organization, and other countries are starting to do that. And this is an example of the United Kingdom doing that. So it's very interesting. And well, here's an explanation of what Hezbollah is in the article. So here we go. Britain's Treasury said it has designated the entire Hezbollah organization as a terrorist group under its terrorism and terrorist financing rules, and as such, its assets will be frozen. Previously, it was only Hezbollah's military wing which was subject to asset freezing under the United Kingdom government rules. Hezbollah, a heavily armed group designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, was established in 1982 by Iran's Revolutionary Guard and guards, and is an important part of the regional Tehran-led alliance known as the Axis of Resistance. Reporting by Sarah Young, editing by Andy Bruce. I mean, that's a really, really short story, but it gives you the particulars. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like watching these pieces move on the world stage. I mean, Iran's fighting foreign pressure and domestic pressure. Their citizens are not happy with the current regime, and Donald Trump is supporting the Iranian citizens. So there's a lot of pressure on Iran, and now more countries around the world are falling in. And in 2018, Canada voted to designate more of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and parts of that government as a terrorist organization. Everybody in Parliament agreed to it, and Justin Trudeau has not followed through. That has not happened yet. So, right? I mean, all of this stuff, it's just interesting. It's like watching a chess game, a slow chess game, because it's like every day you're like watching a single piece move. But I mean, I guess that's why people watch politics, right? I think it's so interesting. That's why I watch it. And the last story for this morning, moving on, is Halifax rental vacancy is now below Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. It is interesting to me how many of these articles can be written without mentioning immigration. And the other part of this is foreign ownership, right? If you could invest in a property that was definitely going to increase in value, and you know it's going to increase in value because lots of rich people in China and other places are buying up Canadian property, so the prices are just going to keep rising. It's wild, right? Like, it's a very, very safe investment at this point in time, especially with Justin Trudeau in. And the amount of people just in Canada right now, I mean, the housing needs in Canada right now are unbelievable. It's wild. Okay, here we go. It's now harder to find an apartment in Halifax than it is in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, according to a new study. In its 2019 fall rental market survey, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, found that the vacancy rate has dropped to a new low of 1%. The vacancy rate in Montreal and the Greater Toronto Area in 2019 was 1.5%, while it was 1.1% in Vancouver. In 2018, Halifax's apartment vacancy rate was 1.6%. Lisa Roberts, the NDP MLA for Halifax Needham, said the numbers prove that there needs to be an urgent response from government. While the numbers are surprising, they're not maybe as surprising to me as they are to some people, she said. We've been seeing the situation developing, and yet all the public money that we have spent in the last 4 years, maybe longer, has not gone to actually preventing the situation getting this critical. Jill McClellan with HRM Planning Development said a healthy vacancy rate in the city is generally 3 to 5%. So to her, Halifax's 1% vacancy rate is very concerning. Housing is an important issue no matter what size of city you are, said McClellan. It's something that everyone needs to be paying attention to, whether you're a big city or a small city or even a town. It's something that's very important to look at. The CMHC numbers represent privately owned apartment buildings with 3 or more units. With the decreased vacancy rate, the average rent increased 3.8% to $1,113. Here's a breakdown of the average rent prices for the primary rental market by bedroom type. And I just found this interesting. The vacancy rate is 1%, so this is just kind of an infographic, but here's broken down by bachelor, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom or more. And the lowest vacancy rate is a 2 bedroom apartment at less than 1%, 0.9%, right? 1 bedroom is 1%, 1.3% for a bachelor, but that doesn't help families, and 1.2% for 3 bedroom, but that's just attributed to cost, right? It's a lot more expensive, or potentially could be a lot more expensive, especially if you're like a single guy and you can't get into a 2 bedroom, but you need an office or something, right? Or a single gal, doesn't matter. Back to this. Due to the higher demand, the vacancy rate continues to drop despite consistent growth in rental supply, according to the report. In light of this growing demand, there are currently over 4,000 rental units under construction in the Halifax CMA, which is the highest level at any point in time, the report states. The report notes that key areas of growth include the Halifax Peninsula, Mainland North, and Hammonds Plains. McClellan says planning and development is looking at incentives for affordable housing, such as waiving construction-related permitting costs for affordable housing developments. We're also looking at how we're going to spend... I don't like stuff like this, by the way. I think that it should be an equal playing field, right? And in this market, what's the incentive to build the affordable housing? I realize they're trying to incentivize by doing this, but I don't like it. It's too complicated and will not result in... look at the affordable housing that was purchased years ago by cities and municipalities, right? It hasn't maintained within the ownership of the city and municipality. It's just become a house. So anyway, there's problems with these policies. Back to this. We're now looking at how we can spend the density bonusing money from affordable housing through the Centre Plan, and we're also looking at how we can use our surplus land to help leverage more affordable housing as well, she added. Nova Scotia. Objectives and priorities for affordable housing help us maintain existing housing programs and, most importantly, allow us to better serve Nova Scotians who are in need of housing, Porter said. Nationally, the CMHC said rental apartment vacancy hits their lowest level since 2002, with this being the third consecutive year of declines. The Federal Housing Agency says average rents increased by 3.9% for a two-bedroom rental apartment, the fastest rate of same sample rent growth since 2001. The CMHC figures were found through surveys conducted in October 2019. So, I mean, the housing prices keep marching up, the vacancy rates keep marching down, and there's no will to fix this problem. No will. And people talk about how rich Canada is. I hate to break it to you. There's an entire generation of people who are between 20 and 30 years old who cannot afford to get into this housing market. The math doesn't make sense. It's too expensive. So what's that going to do? We are going to pay for this, and it's going to be a steep bill. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful